Listen up, beautiful people. I want to take just a minute to tell you about our new hosting site, Anchor. Anchor is your one stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now, Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. So go to anchor.fm/start and become part of the Anchor community today. And now, back to the show.
Alrighty, folks, welcome into another brand new edition of the 901 Soccer Podcast. I'll be your host. I'm Lauren Stocker. You can find me on Twitter at LDoc93. You can find the 901 Soccer Podcast on Twitter at 901 Soccer Pod. You can find us on Facebook as well. Just go over there and search 901 Soccer, and we should pop right up. On this episode of the podcast, we'll be talking Memphis 901 FC's defeat to Orlando City in the fourth round of the U.S. Open Cup out at Mike Rose on Wednesday night. A bit of a rundown on that. We'll talk about the game and how that all played out. We'll talk about the support that Memphis 901 FC got. It was a full house out there at Mike Rose and then some, and then I'll give you my thoughts on some refereeing controversies and maybe take a look at the Open Cup at large. And what I mean by that is there's usually a lot of discussion, especially in the last several years, about MLS teams going on the road to lower division teams. Memphis 901 FC is certainly the beneficiary of that, as we saw. I'll give you my thoughts on all of that. So jumping right into it here, Memphis 901, they get to host Orlando City from MLS in the fourth round of the U.S. Open Cup. How do we get here? Well, MLS teams typically don't join the Open Cup until the fourth round, so Orlando City had not played anybody in the Open Cup up to this point. Memphis 901 FC had gotten the Open Cup off to a fantastic start with a pair of home wins. They got a 3-1 win over the New York Rebels U23 squad, and then they played the Hartford Athletic out at Mike Rose and absolutely boat raced them to the tune of 4-0, setting up a matchup with Orlando from MLS. Before the draw was made and Orlando was announced as the opponent, there were, who did you want to play if you were Memphis? If you wanted the exposure, like a major national audience tuned in, you wanted Atlanta, as the reigning MLS Cup champions. They typically make fairly deep U.S. Open Cup runs. Obviously, they fill up Mercedes-Benz stadiums with 40,000 people every single game. They've got some of the best players in North America on that roster. So if you were looking for the exposure, that was the one that you wanted. If you wanted a little bit less exposure but a much higher likelihood of a win, you wanted Orlando. Because there were only two MLS. You were going to get an MLS team, and you could get either Orlando or Atlanta based on the geography of the way U.S. Soccer did the draw. Orlando obviously is an MLS team. You're going to get a little bit of that national exposure, but not quite what you get with Atlanta. But on the flip side, and I said it when the draw got announced, I felt this was a very winnable game for Memphis 901 FC. Orlando has never made the playoffs in MLS in their history. When the draw was made, they were 10th out of 12 teams in the Eastern Conference of MLS. By the time the game rolled around, they bumped that up to 8th, but that's still out of the playoff spots. And they typically don't make you deep U.S. Open Cup runs. On more than one occasion, they've been knocked out by a lower-tier team. And so all the ingredients were really kind of there for Memphis. And what I'll say is this. Against Indy 11 on Saturday, Memphis looked completely overwhelmed and out of their depth, and they just got run out of the building. That was not the case against Orlando. Orlando came in, and they rolled out, for the most part, what I consider to be a fairly strong, full-strength, almost first-team lineup. Unfortunately, Nani was not there. Nani, the former Portuguese international, former star at a number of fine European clubs. Don't forget that at the 2014 World Cup, he did score the opening goal of the game against the U.S. in the second group stage off a missed clearance by Jeff Cameron. But Nani's played. He played at Sporting Lisbon, Manchester United, Fenerbahce in Turkey, and he played at Valencia, and now he's playing with Orlando City in MLS. But unfortunately, it was explained to me, and it kind of went in one ear and went out the other. Regarding what players are eligible for the Open Cup, and apparently there's certain paperwork you have to file to be registered to be eligible to play. I don't know. I was only sort of kind of half paying attention because I was writing something and somebody was talking and there was a lot going on. But anyway, Nani didn't make the trip. That's the bottom line. He wasn't in town, which was disappointing. Dom Dwyer was the other big gun who I would have said I would have liked to have seen play, and we discussed. We felt like Dom Dwyer never really got a fair shake with the national team after the group stage of the Gold Cup 2 years ago. And his motor and work rate and effort was something that was sorely missing during the last 4 games of that doomed World Cup qualifying campaign. But as long as we had Michael Bradley walking in Trinidad to take a corner kick with no time left on the clock, everything was fine. Anyway, so no Nani, no Dom Dwyer, but you had a starting 11 that included Christian Higuita, one of the better players in MLS. You had Sacha Kljestan, former U.S. international, scored 6 goals in something like 52 international appearances for the U.S. You had Tesho Akindele, who 4 years ago was going to be the next big thing, and then he was going to be the greatest Canadian player of all time. He sort of kind of disappeared from the international level. He still, I think, has 2 goals and maybe 10 to 15 appearances for Canada. But those are all dudes that start week in and week out for Orlando and MLS. James O'Connor was their manager. He's no stranger to the U.S. Open Cup, formerly the manager at Louisville City. He won a USL championship. He took Louisville City all the way to the quarterfinals of the U.S. Open Cup last year, where they were the last non-MLS team standing. So that was something that was certainly playing to Orlando's strength. And, the first, I'd say 20, 25 minutes of the game, Memphis was not overawed or overwhelmed at all. They came out and they had the lion's share of the chances, and they just couldn't put them away. We asked Coach McQueen about that in the post-game press conference. He said he didn't really feel like they wasted a lot of chances like they have so often this season. He said, they did a good enough job, he felt, at creating chances, and then eventually in the second half they ended up getting on the end of that one, but I'm getting ahead of myself, so we'll dial back on that for a second. But, first half of the first half, Memphis was, I would say, the better team. And then just kind of the talent and the experience and the skill level of Orlando took over. And eventually it led to them earning a penalty, which Sacha Kljestan stepped up and dispatched with remarkably, that was a perfect penalty. Scott Levine guessed the right way and very nearly got to it. And I don't know that Manuel Neuer or Tim Howard or David De Gea or Thibaut Courtois or anybody in the world is getting to that, because you couldn't have put it any better than Sacha Kljestan put it. Hard, fast, low to the goalkeeper's left. Levine gets the right way. That's all you can ask. And Orlando goes up 1-0. And then, like they did against Indy, Memphis responded very well to the goal. They came out and created several more chances. Went into halftime down 1-0. Not the end of the world. Not a big deal. And they come out guns blazing to start the second half. Not 5 minutes into the second half, Najim takes a corner, comes in. Elliot Collier finally wins a header. And it's 1-1. And now all of a sudden, anything's possible. It's like, oh, wow, we've got 35, 40 minutes left to play in this game. We can do this. It might happen. And then this is where everything kind of went to hell in a handbasket. There was a tangle at midfield, and Memphis thought it should have been a foul. Orlando kept playing. Higuita comes right down, finds a beautiful ball for Sacha Kljestan, who foul or not at midfield, we'll get to that in a minute. There's really no reason for... Really, Sacha Kljestan is the best player on the field. There's really no reason for him to be unmarked at the penalty spot when the ball's coming in. There were 4 Memphis defenders in the box, and none of them were within 4 feet of Sacha Kljestan. And so Oh, that's one of those ones where all you got to do, you stick your foot out and it's going in the goal, and that's exactly what happened. And so that makes it 2-1, and now Memphis has to chase the game again, and then again the talent and the skill and there's just the betterness of, is that even a word? The betterness of Orlando just kind of took over. Memphis makes an attacking substitution. They bring Morgan Hackworth on, and as they do that, Orlando gets a corner, and there's a scramble on the goal line, and they tap it in, and it's 3-1, and the wind goes out of your sails. And so that ended up being that. Orlando gets out of town with a 3-1 win. Memphis 901 FC's run in the U.S. Open Cup is over in the fourth round. 2 wins, 1 loss on the year in that competition. Now, here after the game, Tim Mulqueen, Elliot Collier, and Mark Birch were all vehement in that they felt they got screwed. They felt that it should have been a foul against Orlando on Metzger at midfield, and that shouldn't have led to another goal. And Elliot Collier, to nobody in particular, as he was walking out of the makeshift locker room over there, I can't repeat exactly what he said, but it started with an F and it ended with ing. It was that believable. So and Mark Birch came out after the game and said that he felt that they got cheated by the referee. He felt that it shouldn't have been a penalty in the first half. He felt that they got screwed on the no call in the second half. He also took exception with the fact that the referee made him stop the ball completely when trying to take a free kick, and he did it 3 times in quick succession. Mark, when the referee is rolling his fingers like that, that means the ball was moving and it's got to stop. It really shouldn't take you 3 tries to get that right. Also, the penalty in the first half, clear-cut stonewall penalty. No problem with that. Where I agree with the Memphis players and with Coach Mulqueen, it was absolutely 100% to me a foul at midfield that led to the second Orlando goal. And you guys know me. You know 99 times out of 100, I'm looking for a reason to support the referee. And 99 times out of 100, I find one. This ain't one of those times. The only thing I can figure, and this is not to excuse the no call, this is not to say it was the right decision not to call it, this is not to say any of that. So before everybody loses their minds, write that down, set it in stone. This is not absolving the referee of blame in this one particular scenario. What I think happened, and I'll tell you what, because I've been guilty of this before as a referee. I think the referee anticipated Metzger getting past his man and started to cheat and go upfield and took his eyes off the play, expecting the ball to go long. And then when that didn't happen, he got caught and looked, and by the time he looks back, Higuita's already halfway down the field. That's what I think happened. Does that make it right? No, it does not. But I think that's what happened. I think if you go back and look, that's probably going to be the case. But at the end of the day, I got to agree with Coach Mulqueen, Elliot Collier, and Mark Birch. I think that was a missed call. I think it should have been a foul. It wasn't. It cost Memphis a goal. It cost them the game. So that's my thought on that. Now, the last thing I want to touch on before we shut it down is the crowd. The stadium at Mike Rose. Well, first off, there were a lot of folks that were unhappy that the game was being played at Mike Rose instead of at AutoZone Park. Well, the Redbirds were in town playing a game tonight, I believe. So there wasn't going to be, you couldn't have the game on Tuesday because there wasn't going to be enough time to flip it from baseball to soccer back to baseball. And so I agree with what Craig Unger put out in a statement on Twitter. He said, look, there's 2 things we can do. Since we can't play at AutoZone Park, we can take advantage of a very high-quality soccer facility in Memphis, which will allow fans in town to be able to go see the team, or we could send the team on the road and nobody gets to go. So shout out to Craig Unger for, making the smart, common sense decision and saying, hey, Mike Rose, you've got a stadium. We'll play there. Now, that being said, Memphis showed out very well for this game. The first game at Mike Rose against Hartford Athletic, they got 1,819. It was 18-19 because the previous weekend, Memphis has just celebrated their 200th birthday, having been founded in 1819. So that was actually quite the appropriate attendance for that night. Do I wish it would have been higher? Sure. I just thought that was kind of a cool little quirk. This time, for the Orlando game, on Tuesday, I believe, Memphis City came out and said all the seating in the stands sold out. We're opening up grass seating on the grassy hill right there behind the south goal. The stadium capacity at Mike Rose is 2,500. Announced attendance for the game at Mike Rose against Orlando City, 3,088. That's a sellout and then some. That's a sellout plus 588 people. That's impressive. Shout out to the Bluff City Mafia. And you know what? They didn't bring a lot of people. I counted. There were probably maybe, I didn't count. I eyeballed it. I'd say there were 12 to 15 Orlando fans. They brought a respectable amount of noise for a small contingent. They brought a bunch of smoke bombs, which unfortunately they got to set off quite a bit. And they had these two dudes with these flags that were these giant flags. And, you know, the Bluff City Mafia, they roll with some flags, but not like this. These flags looked like they belonged on a Revolutionary War battlefield. Like, you know, if anyone's ever seen the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson, as cinema, fantastic movie. As history, absolute garbage. But, you know, there's the scenes where the two armies are marching together and the British guys have their flags and the American guys have their flags. That's what these Orlando fans look like. They look like that, which I thought was, you know, pretty cool. But 3,088 people in a 2,500-seat stadium. That's impressive. Which leads me to, there's been this push, I'd say about the last 2 or 3 years. As a matter of fact, I think it was when FC Cincinnati was still in the USL, and they made that run to the semifinals. I guess that was in 2017, where they beat the Chicago Fire. They're playing at Nippert Stadium, and they were getting 30,000 people a game. And Taylor Twellman of ESPN has been the one leading this charge, has made the point that to make the Open Cup better and to have better atmospheres, the thing to do is at least through the quarterfinals, up to the quarterfinals, have MLS teams go on the road to the USL or NASL or NPSL or whoever. Have MLS teams go on the road to lower division teams. Because here's why. You may not get 10,000 people at a USL game for an MLS team, but that's going to be a full house and a raucous crowd and a great atmosphere. And it's going to add an air of legitimacy to it. Some of the other games in MLS stadiums, Colorado Rapids were playing New Mexico United, and I think there were 17 people there. And I bet 15 of them were New Mexico fans. You had allegedly 5,000 for the Dynamo game, allegedly 7,000 for the San Jose Earthquakes, allegedly 8,000 for the Columbus Crew. I say allegedly because you look at that and you could probably sit there, and if you took an extra 5 minutes, you could probably count every single person in the stadium. That's dreadful. Nobody wants to play in front of a stadium, in a 25,000-seat stadium with 3,500 people in it. Send MLS teams through the quarterfinals on the road to lower division teams. Make that mandatory. Put it in, set it in stone. Make it happen. Because if you want this competition to get the respect and atmosphere it deserves, that's the way to do it. Because if this had been the other way around and Memphis went to Orlando, there would have been more people, more tickets sold in Orlando than there were in Memphis, but I will take 3,088 in a 2,500-seat stadium over 4,000 in a 26,000-seat stadium 10 times out of 10. Every single time. So, shout out to the Bluff City Mafia. Shout out to all of the folks in Memphis who made the trip out to Mike Rose to support Memphis 901 FC, the boys in blue, in their final game of the U.S. Open Cup. All right, that's going to wrap it up here for us on this latest edition of the 901 Soccer Podcast. Thank everybody for hanging out and listening to me yell about things. Again, I'm Lawrence Dockery. I've been your host. You can find me on Twitter at ldoc93. You can find the 901 Soccer Podcast on Twitter at 901 Soccer Pod. You can find us over on Facebook as well. That's facebook.com. Search 901 Soccer. Just want to let everybody know there will be a recap. I was on assignment as well as I was live tweeting for the 901 Soccer Podcast. I was on assignment for a website called thecup.us, the longest continuing coverage of the U.S. Open Cup. So there'll be a recap of that for that site dropping soon. You can check it out at either of the Twitter accounts that I've laid out so far. So again, I want to thank everybody for listening. Unfortunately, it did not go Memphis' way, but got to strap up. Next home game is the 22nd at AutoZone Park against Pachuca, and that should be a fun one. Hope to see everybody there, and hopefully we'll get to do a post-game podcast talking about a win on that one. Until then, we'll talk to you later.